channel. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to crochet a mini checkered sweater. You're going to need 3 colors for this. It doesn't work with 2 colors. If you wanted to do 2, then 2 of the same color would just end up being on top of each other. So you have to use 3 colors. I'm using Wait For yarn, specifically Big Twist. Everyone knows I love Big Twist from Joann. You can use any Wait For yarn. And it is acrylic, and I am using a 5mm hook. 5.25 would also be okay for this. This is a beginner friendly project, and I am going to be explaining it in as much detail as I can. You can always ask me questions in the comments. And I will also be sharing measurements for different sizes of sweaters, or you can measure against a sweater of your own. You're going to start with whatever color you want to be first. And you don't need to create a long tail. I do like to use long tails for sewing, but I always do it on the sleeve, not on the body panel. So if you're also the type of person that likes to create a long tail to sew the project together, you don't need to do it for the body panel. I'll show you how to do it for the sleeve. So I just make a little tail for the body panel, and we are going to be chaining multiples of 6. So I've written down how long you want the chain to be based on your size in inches. So starting with small, you're going to want it to be 20 inches, then it goes up by 2s. Medium is 22, large is 24, extra large is 26, so on. I am making a large, so that's why I have extra notes by the large. And just for reference, I'm going to be chaining 90, so yours is going to be somewhere around there too. And especially if you are going to be doing sizes near mine, you're probably just going to be going either up or down 6. And I do want to note that using acrylic yarn, acrylic is super stretchy, and so measurements don't have to be super exact. So if you chain a multiple of 6 and you're trying to get it to the exact measurement for your size, but it's not quite working out, it can be a little off, especially if it's like 1 inch too small or 1 inch too big. That doesn't really create a problem. Acrylic yarn stretches a lot. And you can also always measure against a sweater that you own. If you have a sweater that you like the size of and you're making this sweater for yourself, that is always an option. I'm going to chain 90 for my size large. Chain 90, and you are going to want to make a note of how much you chain so that you're able to do it for your second body panel as well. Both body panels are going to be exactly the same. And now you are going to go into the 5th chain from the hook and double crochet. So this is the chain that is closest to the hook. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to double crochet, and for this product we are working in clusters of 3. However, this that we've created right now is technically a chain that would count as a double crochet. So we are going to be doing 3, but we're counting this as 1. So this is 1 double crochet, this is another double crochet, and we're going to be making 1 more for a total of 3, with this extra counting as the first double crochet. Then we are going to chain 3, and we are going to skip 3 chains down here. So 1, 2, 3, and then double crochet into the 4th. So we are creating a space for the checker pattern. So when we do the next color in the next row, the 3 cluster is going to be going here in this empty space that we've created, and it's going to be going over this chain 3. So multiples of 3, we are going to be doing 2 more double crochets on top of the one we just did, and then we are chaining 3. This pattern doesn't have any increases or decreases, so whenever I refer to double crocheting for 3 stitches or doing 3 double crochets, I am never meaning increases. I'm always meaning 1 double crochet in 1 stitch 3 times. So then we're going to be skipping 3 stitches again, 1, 2, 3, and going into the 4th one with a double crochet. We're going to be doing this until the end of the row. At the end of my row with 6 stitches left, perfect amount. I'm skipping 3 and double crocheting into 3. And then at the end of this row, we are going to cut off the yarn. I am going to be cutting off the yarn to switch colors in every row. You can carry the yarn if you want to. I don't like carrying yarn for big projects. If you don't know what carrying the yarn is, it's when you have all 3 of your color choices attached to the project at all times. So that way you're not cutting off the yarn like I am and reattaching yarn for every row. The yarn is just always attached. And then you also don't have to deal with weaving in ends. For larger projects, I don't like to have so many yarns attached to my project because it can get tangled or things like that. So I never really choose to carry the yarn unless it seems essential. But I will put a link to the video where I learned how to do the checkerboard, because they do carry the yarn. So if you want to see how to carry the yarn, if you would rather choose that option, then you can check out that video as well. So I am just going to be cutting off the yarn every time and then attaching my next color. I have now turned the project and I'm going to be attaching this darker purple. I like to weave in ends as I go, but for this I wait until I'm done with the next row and then I go back and weave in the ends from the previous row, just to make sure I'm not weaving the ends into somewhere where I still need to crochet into, if that makes sense. So I just let the ends hang here, and then I will just weave them in as I go from the previous row. So we're actually chaining 4, and we are going to be skipping all of these stitches. We're not going into any of these stitches. We're going down into the foundation chain with a double crochet. So I'll show that again. I'm going over, and then I am going in front of this post, so it's going to end up being within the double crochet. We're going to be hiding those chain 3s. So then I am taking the yarn over it and just completely double crocheting over it. And we are going to do that 3 times to fill in those gaps. And even if you are a beginner crocheter, it's going to be so slow this row and the next row, and then it's going to start getting quicker. It's really hard to get used to this stitch. So sorry, we're chaining 3. So we're always going to be chaining 3 to create a space for the next row for the checker. So chaining 3, skipping this cluster and going straight for the foundation chain, crocheting over the chain 3 post that we did in the last row. And it does end up being a little scrunchy. That's okay. It will end up flattening out eventually as much as it needs to. Chaining 3 again and going in again, skipping. So it takes a lot of effort to get your hook all the way over here, skipping all those areas, creating a gap. It just makes it go slower, but then you get used to it, and there's also like more of the project to hold on to with this hand, as is with other projects. So it does become faster. It's going to be so slow in the first like 3 rows. I am near the end of this row now, so I'm gonna do my last cluster of double crochets and 3s. And for this row, we are going to do a chain 3 and then just slip stitch into the top of this chain, really in any spot that you can put it into. Slip stitch, and for me, I'm cutting off the yarn. If you're carrying yarn, then just continue carrying the yarn. And now I have my third color choice. I will be attaching it. And here we will be chaining 3, as opposed to last row we were chaining 4. So the last row and this row are going to be the ones that you're constantly repeating for the rest of the project. So we're chain 3, and then that counts as our first double crochet. So we don't have to go back into this stitch, and then you can see that there are 2 more stitches to go into that are on top of actual double crochets, whereas this one is on top of the chain that was acting like a double crochet. So we are just going to go into those 2 chains with double crochets over the 3 chain posts, like we did that in the last row, and chaining 3, creating this post, to then skip over this one and start crocheting into the light purple row, or whatever color your first row is. You do have to move this over a little to make sure you're getting the first stitch there, because it constantly is going to be hiding underneath, like this last double crochet of this cluster. You want to push it over and make sure you're getting into the first of the 3 to do your 3 double crochets, and then chaining 3 to go over this and go directly into the next cluster from the first row, which is my light purple row. And again, like I said, it is so hard to get these stitches in the first couple of rows, and then it gets so much easier out of nowhere. So moving this over to make sure that the first stitch is actually showing. Double crochet 3 times, chain 3, go over this cluster into the next one with 3 double crochets. Everything is in groups of 3, except for the one time when you chain 4. And now I am at the end of this row, and there is a gap here. So we are going to go into these 3 stitches with double crochets like normal. The row ends pretty normally, and like I said, you're going to be repeating this row and this row, but I'm going to show them again. And then this is the point where I weave in these ends, and I'm going to change color. So because of the gapping that we're creating, we're not really doing complete rows every time. So normally if I was doing a sweater and doing regular rows of double crochet, I would do about 30 rows. But as you can see, here we've done 3 rows, but it basically looks like we've done 2. If you count only the rows that are on the side, there's just 2. So it is going to seem like a lot of rows that we have to do, but that's only because of the nature of the pattern and that we're not really doing full rows every time. I just want to say that before I say how many rows we're going to be doing before we start focusing on the shoulder part and forming the neckline. So on the side, if you're only counting these like clusters as rows, then it is going to end up being 28 of these. But if you're counting all 3 rows, like if you count 1, 2, 3, then we are going to be doing 56 rows. It goes faster than it sounds. 56 sounds like a lot of rows to be doing, but obviously we're not just fully doing rows because we're skipping things. So we have to do 56 rows if we're counting all 3 colors, or until the length that you reach is about 23 inches long. And like I said, after that we will be adding a couple of rows of shoulder part, so then the sweater will end up being a little longer than 23 inches. long. So I'm going to show you those 2 repeating rows one more time, and then I'm going to send you off to do 56 of them in total. Going back to the original color, we are chaining 4. You don't necessarily have to try to remember which row you are on, because it's going to be very visually obvious what you have to be doing. Like at the beginning of this row, there is no gap to go into. There's just this cluster already there, and so in order to go over that cluster, we need a chain of 4 to get us completely over that and into this gap where we can put our double crochets, which is what we're going to do. So there's no need to remember like, oh, I'm on the row where I chain 4, or I'm on the row where I chain 3. It's just going to be pretty visually obvious what you have to do. And then we're going to go across as normal with the 3 double crochets and chaining 3. I'm at the end of this row. There is no gap to go into, so I am chaining 3 and slip stitching into the top of the previous row and preparing for a new yarn. I am going to attach my next color. And this time we are chaining 3, and the chain 3 counts as a double crochet, so that we don't have to double crochet into this first stitch, but we can double crochet into the next 2. Over the post from the last row, chain 3, and we are going to go into this cluster again. Make sure you're moving this over to get the right stitch to go into. I am now at the end of this row, and you can see that there is a gap to go into, so we are going to do our chain 3 and double crochet into these last 3 stitches over this light purple post and changing colors. So we are going to be repeating those 2 rows for a total of 56 rows, or until you have the length that you want, really, aside from a couple more inches where we will be doing a shoulder part. You should end up on your second color though, because then I will be showing how to complete the neckline with the last color. Not that it really matters, you can end on whatever color you want to end on, but if you like to have that perfection of patterns, then I would suggest ending on your second color. Once you have your desired length, we are going to be using stitch markers to help us create the neckline that we want. So I have ended on my second color in the pattern, and I'm going to find a place with 2 stitch markers that will create a neckline that has a width of about 8 to 9 inches. And for me, that was 5 blocks in. Blocks are clusters, being like this chunk right here of this color. So if I'm counting from this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm putting the stitch marker at the end of it and doing the same thing on the other side. And then measuring in between that, it ends up being 8.5 inches. And now we are going to create one more full row before adding about 3 rows for just shoulder part. So this is going to be the last row that goes all the way across the entire thing. So we are going to be working up to that stitch marker, just in the normal way that we've been doing the pattern. We're still creating the gap sections up until the stitch marker. Once you have gotten to the part right before the stitch marker, you can remove the stitch marker and do one more gap here. And now up until the next stitch marker, oops, don't do that, don't chain 3. We are going to single crochet into the top of this, because this is the last part before you would be creating your neckline, so we don't want to have gaps anymore. So we are single crocheting into these 3 double crochets from the previous row, and then doing our double crochets. And then single crochets right above here, above these double crochets, and double crochets again, up until we reach the stitch marker, so that we're creating a final row or part of a row that does not have any gaps. Once you've gotten to that stitch marker, you can remove it and then start doing the row in the normal way of the pattern again, including the gaps. So I'm going back to chaining 3 and hopping over to this previous row to make double crochets. The end of the row, we're going to cut off the yarn, and now we're just going to be working on the shoulder parts. I'm not going to turn my work, although you can start from any side really for this shoulder part, but I'm going to be attaching this color, continuing the pattern, and then just working up until the part where we had our stitch marker. You can see where it was because there's no gaps anymore. And we're going to be doing this row with the gaps, so just as normal for the pattern, chaining 4, skipping over, creating a cluster of 3, chaining 3. Do this up until you get to the point where you had the stitch marker. And now you can see I'm coming up towards the end. So I'm just going to finish this cluster and cut off the yarn. And we're going to turn around and do the same thing on the other side to create the other shoulder part. And from this side we will also be chaining 4, so I'm just going to go in right here, chain 4, and create the gap. And do this until the place where you had the second stitch marker. Here I am at the end again where it stops having gaps, so I'm going to chain 1 and cut off the yarn, and then we're just going to do the same thing again for the next row with your second color in your pattern. So I'm going to turn my work, actually I'll just slide it over and work from this side. And since we didn't end this previous row with a chain 3 and then a slip stitch, we ended it with a cluster. We're just going to end up chaining 4 again, just at the beginning of this row, and then going into this cluster over here. And at the end of the row, I'm going to cut off the yarn. And do the same thing on the other side, once again. Once you are finished doing your second color in your pattern on both sides of the shoulder part, you're going to turn your work, although at this point it doesn't really matter which side you're starting from. And this is going to be our last row of the whole body panel. And especially for the shoulders, so we are not going to have any gaps anymore. We are going in with our third color, attaching the yarn on the top of this double crochet that we did in the previous row where we finished off, and chain 2 is fine. We are not going to be making a big chain and jumping over here. We are going to be single crocheting into all the places where we would normally do a chain, just like we did the last time we had this color. So chaining 2 can count as a single crochet here, and then you can just do 2 single crochets on top of these. And then we are going back with double crochet into the first color of your pattern down here, and then we are going back to single crochets for the place where we would normally do a chain, and then back to double crochets. Push this over because I know I'm missing one right here. We get to the end, we fill in the last gap, and when we cut off the yarn, we are going to leave an extra long tail, but you only need to do that on one body panel. So the front and the back body panel are going to be the same exact thing. You're going to rewind the video and start over when you do the back panel. You only need to make a long tail on one of the panels because it's going to be used to sew the 2 panels together. So right here where we finish, we are going to make a slightly long tail. It doesn't have to be that long because it's only going to be used to sew the shoulder parts together. So just sewing this part together. So I am leaving about this much. Probably doesn't even need to be that much. There we go. And finally, just do the same thing on the other side with your very last color, filling in the gaps with the single crochets. And make sure to leave the extra long tail on this side as well. I will add timestamps in the description and in the comments so that you can just click where you need to go. Either you are going to repeat the beginning of the video to do the back body panel, or you will continue on because next we are going to be doing the sleeves. Now we are moving on to the sleeve, which is actually just a rectangle, and it will be folded in half. So this is going to be like about the size of the sleeve. If you've seen any of my previous sweater tutorials, you'll know that I love to do a cuff on a sleeve, but I thought this sweater would look really good without a cuff and just with a wide arm. And plus that way it makes it easier to continue on doing the pattern. So now we will be doing the same thing as the body panel, just in a smaller size. But I do want to mention that for the sleeve, the beginning and the end, we are going to want very long tails, especially the beginning one, because the beginning one is going to be used to sew up the sleeve, and then down the body panel to be sewing the sleeve together when it's folded in half, and then to be sewing the two sides of the body panels together. So let's create a very long tail for the beginning of this sleeve. I always end up going longer than I think I'll need. And remember that we are doing multiples of 6 in the beginning, so I chained 54. I think that one less would be good as well, so that would be 48. With sleeves, I typically don't change the size much to match the size of the sweater that I'm making. Sleeves can pretty much just always be the same size. It's nice to have extra room in the sleeves. And now we will skip 4 chains from the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then go into the 5th one. And don't forget that this chain counts as a double crochet as well. And then we've just done another one, so we only need to do one more to make our first cluster of 3. And then we're going to chain 3 and skip 3 chains. Go into the 4th one with a double crochet, just like we did at the beginning of the body panel. And we are now going to create the same pattern as we did for the body panel, doing the same exact thing for 47 rows, and we are going to end on our second color again, so that we can do our 48th row in our last color and create that row with no gaps. So for 47 rows, we are doing the normal clusters of double crochet and then chaining 3 and creating gaps for the next row. So I will meet you at row 48, or at the end of row 47 going into 48, to create that last row without the gaps, and then we'll be leaving that long tail as well. Once you've gotten to the last row, we are going to chain 2 and do our single crochet row now. 2 single crochets, because the chain 2 could count as a single crochet, or you can do a single crochet in there if you want to. And then the double crochets, no chain, going back to 3 single crochets, double crochets, all the way until the end of the row. Double crochets, then single crochets, filling in all the gaps. Once you're at the end of the row, we're going to leave a long tail. It doesn't have to be as long as the one we made at the beginning, but you're going to want it to be able to sew this width to the body of the sweater. So just to be able to sew across this way. It doesn't have to be that long. When you're done with both body panels and both sleeves, we are going to move on to sewing everything together. I'll try to move the camera back as much as I can for the sewing part, but we're going to take the body panels and lay them out facing each other like this, so that the shoulders are touching each other, and then there's this gap at the neckline part. And we're going to sew them together with our ends. we are going to weave this in and do the same thing to the other side on the other shoulder part. Once both shoulder parts are sewn together and you have the neck hole, we are going to rotate the whole thing so that we're facing the part where we sewed it together right here. That's in the middle. And we're gonna sew the sleeve onto this part. You're gonna fold the sleeve in half to find the center point, or you can just count, especially because we have this easy way of counting with our clusters of 3. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clusters, so it should be in between 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the middle. Put a stitch marker at the middle and then attach the stitch marker to the middle of the place where we just sewed together the shoulder parts, and then lay this out flat, and this is where we're going to sew along. And we're going to be using our long tail to sew, so since this is the middle, we're just going to lay it out flat, no stretching, and just see where it naturally lands and just start sewing at that point. And the stitch marker is just here to keep us in the center parts together of the sleeve and the body panel. So once you get to it, you can just remove it. We don't need it for any other reason. And then just keep sewing along until you get to the end of the sleeve. And once we're done sewing that, I don't like to weave this in yet, just in case if I miscalculated how much I need for the other sewing part. I can always use this to sew down the body panel. I don't think that has happened to me this time, but just in case, I like to leave this until I'm done sewing the rest to make sure. So now we are going to take the project and lift it up at like the shoulder parts, and the sleeve will then begin to fold. You'll have the two armpits together. The body panels will be laying flat against each other, just making the actual sweater shape. And we start all the way down here where we left this long tail at the end of the sleeve. And we are going to sew this tail up the sleeve now that we folded the sleeve in half. Up the sleeve, we'll get to the armpit part where we just left off this end, and then we are going to continue sewing down the body panel all the way to the bottom where no more sewing needs to be done. Here I am at the armpit part, and I'm just going to keep going, changing to go from this way down to this way, down the body panel. You have to do some stretching to make sure the checkerboards are lining up. That's the good thing about this particular pattern, is that you can see that you're sewing correctly because the checkers are always going to be lined up. Once you get to the bottom, you can weave in all the ends that you had left. And now we have one side all sewn together. We are going to do the same exact thing on the other side with the other sleeve. And again, I will put in timestamps in the description and in the comments so that you can just click the timestamp to go back if you need to review how to do the other sleeve or how to sew it on. And then when you're done with that, we will be moving on to the neckline, and then we'll be done. Once you're done sewing everything together, the sweater is actually inside out, so we're going to right side out it. And now you're going to pick just one of your colors to create a neckline and like a ribbed collar. You're going to insert the color that you want into any part around the whole entire neck hole or head hole, and we are going to single crochet all the way around to just start off the border and make everything clean. So I started on the side so that I could show that I'm gonna have to crochet into the sides of like the double crochets that we created. So you could just find any space to single crochet into. Just try to make it consistent on both sides, but then when you get down to the front and also to the back, there's going to be obviously stitches to work right into, because those are the stitches that we ended off on during the body panel. And I'm going to crochet all the way around until I get back to that place that I just started with just single crochets. I'm on the other side now, and I just want to show again what it's like to crochet into any space, because I know that can be hard for beginner crocheters when you're watching a tutorial and it says to just find places to crochet into. So with these long like posts from the side of the double crochet, I'm putting in 2 single crochets, but then like in between the rows I'm just putting in 1. Hopefully that's helpful. I don't like to just say in a tutorial to crochet wherever, because I know that can be confusing for some people. And now I'm back at the beginning where I started, so I'm going to slip stitch into the first stitch, actually not the chain because I only chained 1. And then at this point you can pretty much do any kind of neckline you want. I am going to be doing a ribbed neckline, but you can, if you don't want to do a ribbed neckline, or you just want to leave it kind of square or kind of more open, then you could just do like another row of single crochet or any type of neckline that you know how to do or like to do. I like to do ribbed necklines most of the time, so I'm going to try it out for this. So to do a ribbed neckline, I am going to chain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we are going to single crochet down the chain and attach it to the neckline. So we turn a little, and we're going to be doing 5 single crochets, so we're skipping the one closest to the hook because it would be pretty much impossible to crochet into the one closest to the hook. And we're going to do 5 single crochets, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can adjust the height, so if you wanted to have a bigger neckline collar, then you can chain more. So then we slip stitch into the next stitch, but then also into, so that's attaching it back onto the like bottom of the sweater, but then we're gonna slip stitch into 2 more to make it a little tighter of a neckline. Then we are going to turn and start single crocheting back up. If you are not entirely sure, oh, I should zoom this in for you. If you're not entirely sure where exactly it starts versus where the slip stitches are, then you could just count from the top. I always do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're just going back up and back down. We go up and chain 1 and turn. And then go back down doing 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we are going to slip stitch into the next 3. Make sure you're not slip stitching into the one that you're already in, which is kind of hard to see all the time, but it's gonna be like where this knot is. You're just gonna go into the next one, slip stitch, slip stitch, slip stitch, If you start going all the way around and realizing it might be looking too tight, then you can always just start only skipping 2 or like slip stitching into 2 instead of 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going back into here with single crochet all the way back up. So we're going to be doing this all the way around until we get back to where we started. I am now at the end close to where I started. I actually happen to have 3 stitches left. It's okay if you don't have 3 stitches left to slip stitch into. If it's like 4 or 5 or 2, that's fine. Just go with whatever is left. I will go up one more time. Chain 1, and then I will connect these with a slip stitch. Once you cut off the yarn, we're just going to weave in this last tail and we're done with the whole sweater. I'll be putting the link to my crochet Instagram that you can message me if you have any questions, or if you finish this sweater, I would love it if you tag me in it or send it to me. I would love to see everyone's color combination. And as always, thank you for watching and supporting my channel.